It took less than 5 seconds for a perfect world to shatter, one poison cup of tea at a time. Imagine this: Shadowwood Manor, an emblem of staggering wealth, nestled in the exclusive enclave of Silverwood Hills, home to the seemingly golden couple, millionaire Julian Thorne and his ethereally beautiful pregnant wife, Clara. From the outside, it was a fairy tale. Success, love, a baby on the way. But within those hallowed walls, a venomous secret was brewing, a betrayal so audacious it would culminate in a courtroom drama that would leave the city breathless. You see, Julian, the man who seemingly had it all, was entangled in a dangerous, white-hot affair with the intoxicatingly ambitious Saraphina Dubois. And this wasn't just a rich man's dalliance. Oh no, this was a collision course with consequences so devastating they would nearly destroy an innocent life. What you're about to hear goes far beyond the sanitized headlines. We're peeling back the layers of opulence to reveal the raw, ugly truth of a meticulously planned revenge. How could such luxury mask such darkness? And what twisted obsession could drive a woman to methodically dismantle another's happiness she felt was rightfully hers? Prepare yourself, because the answer is more chilling than you can imagine, and you won't want to miss a single shocking detail of how this dream turned into an absolute nightmare. Shadowwood Manor. Even the name whispered of old money and sprawling, manicured secrets. Ivy climbed its weathered stone walls. Ancient oaks stood sentinel over emerald lawns, and inside, priceless art adorned silk-lined rooms. Julian Thorne, handsome, charismatic, a titan of industry, moved through this world with an easy, inherited grace. Clara, his wife, was the gentle heart of this opulent fortress. Her quiet kindness was a stark contrast to the often brutal society in which they moved. Her pregnancy, a long-awaited joy, seemed to cast a golden glow over everything, a promise of new beginnings. Or so it appeared. But the cracks in this gilded facade were already beginning to show, visible only to those who knew where to look, or to those who, like Saraphina Dubois, were actively seeking them out. Saraphina, a name that dripped with a dangerous allure. She was everything Clara was not: bold, overtly seductive, and possessed of a ruthless, calculating ambition that burned like a cold fire in her amethyst eyes. Julian had met her at a high-profile charity gala, a fleeting encounter that had ignited a spark, then a conflagration. While Clara lovingly planned their nursery, her days filled with soft fabrics and dreams of tiny hands, Julian was increasingly drawn into Saraphina's orbit. His late nights at the office became a convenient, if flimsy, excuse for clandestine meetings in discreet five-star hotel suites across the city. He knew it was wrong. Of course he did. Guilt was a constant, gnawing companion, a bitter taste in his mouth even as he tasted Saraphina's lips. But Saraphina offered an escape, a thrill, a validation that, for reasons he couldn't quite articulate even to himself, he craved. She saw him not just as Clara's husband, the expectant father, but as Julian Thorne, the powerful magnate man to be desired, to be conquered. And Saraphina, it was becoming increasingly clear, was a woman who always got what she wanted. Clara, bless her innocent heart, sensed the shift. A new coolness in Julian's touch, a distance in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Is everything all right, darling?" she'd ask, her voice laced with a gentle, uncomprehending concern. "You seem so preoccupied." Julian would offer a strained smile, a vague reassurance about market pressures, the demands of his empire. And Clara, wanting so desperately to believe in the fairy tale, would accept his explanations, attributing his distraction to the natural anxieties of impending fatherhood. She couldn't told Intalo herself to imagine the truth. The truth was simply too monstrous. But Saraphina saw. She saw Julian's guilt, his wavering resolve, and it only fueled her determination. She saw Clara's gentle naivety not as a virtue, but as a weakness to be exploited. Every gushing society column detailing Clara's radiant pregnancy, Every tender photograph of Julian with his hand resting protectively on Clara's growing belly was like a personal affront, a fresh stab of the jealousy that was rapidly consuming her. Shadowwood Manor, the Thorn name, the life Clara lived so effortlessly it should all be hers. It would be hers. As she watched them from afar, a predatory glint in her eyes, a chilling vow formed in the crucible of her ambition. She is everything I deserve, and soon, very soon, it will all be mine. The game had begun, and Saraphina Dubois played to win, no matter the cost, no matter who was destroyed in the process. The perfect life was about to be shattered, and the whispers of poison were already on the wind. That chilling vow, a silent promise of upheaval, now propelled Saraphina Dubois in a calculated action. She wasn't merely an opportunist, a chance interloper in the gilded life of Julian and Clara Thorne. No, Saraphina was a meticulous predator, and Clara, in her blissful ignorance, had just become her designated prey. The initial phase of her campaign was one of insidious reconnaissance. She became a ghost in Clara's periphery, a shadow absorbing details with unnerving precision. Julian's favorite restaurants, the charities Clara championed, even the specific blend of Earl Grey tea Clara favored each afternoon detail was too trivial for Saraphina's voracious appetite for information. She learned the rhythms of Shadowwood Manor as if she were studying a complex piece of machinery she intended to dismantle. How far would she go? You're about to find out. Julian, meanwhile, was a man increasingly stretched taut. He tried, with the clumsy desperation of a man drowning in his own deceptions, to navigate the treacherous waters between his serene, pregnant wife and his intoxicatingly dangerous mistress. The late nights, once explained away as unavoidable business dinners, became more frequent, the excuses thinner. Missed anniversaries of small, intimate moments that Clara cherished were met with lavish, almost offensively expensive gifts that felt more like reparations than tokens of affection. His replies to Clara's gentle inquiries about his well-being grew shorter, sometimes clipped with an uncharacteristic curtness that pricked at her tender heart. "Is everything all right, darling?" Clara would ask, her voice soft, her hand resting on his arm as he stared blankly at a financial report, the words clearly not registering. Her brow would furrow with concern. "You seem so distant lately. Is the new project weighing on you so heavily?" She'd search his face, her eyes wide with an innocent hope that he would confide in her, that this was just the stress of impending fatherhood, the weight of his vast empire pressing down. A baby, their baby. How could anything but joy surround such a miracle? This naivety, this unwavering belief in his inherent goodness, was a shield Clara held up against the creeping shadows. But it was a shield Saraphina was already finding ways to pierce. One has to wonder, how long can such innocence last in the face of calculated malice? The annual Silverwood Children's Hospital fundraiser, hosted that year amidst the baronial splendor of Shadowwood Manor, provided Saraphina with her first formal entree into Clara's world. She arrived on the arm of Damien Vance, a peripheral business associate of Julian's, a man easily charmed and utterly oblivious to the true nature of the woman he escorted. Saraphina was a vision in a bespoke crimson gown that clung to her every curve, a stark, deliberate contrast to the softer pastels favored by the Silverwood Hills matriarchs. Her dark hair was swept up in an intricate chignon, drawing attention to the predatory gleam in her amethyst eyes. She was designed to captivate, and when Julian's gaze fell upon her as she entered the grand ballroom, his breath hitched. A flicker of something panic, desire crossed his features before he quickly schooled them into a mask of polite surprise. He prayed Clara wouldn't notice the way his eyes lingered a moment too long. "Julian, my dear fellow," Damien boomed, steering Saraphina forward. "I believe you haven't had the pleasure of meeting Saraphina Dubois." Julian forced a smile, his hand extending automatically. "Ms. Dubois, a pleasure." His voice was a shade too hearty. Saraphina's laugh was a low, melodious purr, perfectly calibrated. "The pleasure is all mine," Mr. Thorne. Damien has told me so much about your philanthropic endeavors. She offered her hand to Clara next, her touch surprisingly firm, her nails the color of dried blood, a stark contrast against Clara's pale skin. As their hands met, a subtle, venomous glint, like the flicker of a serpent's tongue, danced in Saraphina's eyes. Clara felt an inexplicable shiver trace its way down her spine, a sudden, unwelcome chill despite the warmth of the crowded room. She dismissed it as a trick of the light, the fatigue of her advancing pregnancy. A simple shiver, or a premonition of the darkness to come. Later, amidst the clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of polite society, Saraphina engineered a moment alone with Julian near the sweeping ancestral staircase, its dark wood polished to a mirror sheen. She leaned in close, her perfumey a heady blend of night-blooming jasmine and something darker, more exotic enveloping him. "This is quite the life you've built, Julian," she whispered, her voice a silken caress that nevertheless carried an edge of steel. Her eyes swept the opulent hall, lingered on a portrait of Clara, radiant and innocent, and then returned to his. "Your lovely wife. So perfect." The sarcasm was a palpable thing, coating the last word with a layer of disdain. Julian exhaled slowly, the scent of her proximity both intoxicating and suffocating. "Saraphina, not here. Please." His voice was a low, urgent plea. He could feel the eyes of Silverwood Hills on them, could almost hear the whispers. "Relax, darling," she murmured, her lips curving into a sly, knowing smile. "I'm merely admiring the scenery." She tilted her head, her gaze deliberately provocative. "Or am I not allowed to appreciate such domestic bliss?" He forced a tight smile at a passing grand dame whose eyes lingered on them with undisguised curiosity. "You know this is complicated," he hissed, his composure fraying. Seraphina's soft laugh was devoid of genuine humor, a chilling little sound. "Oh, I'm well aware of the complications, Julian. But I'm also a woman who appreciates ambition. And what I want, I usually get." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air between them, a dangerous undercurrent beneath the facade of the glittering event. Julian felt trapped, caught between the iron necessity of maintaining appearances and the dangerous, illicit thrill that still simmered, however much he tried to deny it. The encounter, brief as it was, solidified Seraphina's resolve. Seeing Clara so effortlessly ensconced in the life Seraphina craved, seeing the baby bump that represented an unbreakable bond, fueled the acidic burn of her jealousy. This wasn't just about Julian anymore. It was about the status, the power, the entirety of the life Clara possessed. It was a life Seraphina believed was rightfully hers. She knew with a chilling certainty that subtle maneuvering was no longer enough. She needed something more definitive. Her mind, always a labyrinth of cunning schemes, turned to darker avenues. She recalled a name from her more colorful past in the city's underbelly, before she had meticulously crafted her current polished persona, a man known only as Silas, a purveyor of rare and often illicit botanical tinctures, a shadowy acquaintance who operated in the city's forgotten corners. He was a ghost in the system, untraceable, a master of his obscure craft. The meeting was arranged with a single coded message in a dimly lit alleyway, smelling of damp stone and decay, far from the glittering lights of Silverwood Hills. Silas was a wraith-like figure, his face perpetually obscured by shadow and the brim of a worn hat. He didn't ask questions, only listened, his silence more unnerving than any interrogation. "I have a personal matter," Seraphina stated, her voice cool and steady despite the thrumming in her veins. "I require something unique, a compound that induces slow harm, something that mimics a natural decline for a delicate constitution." She watched his shadowed face for any reaction, but there was none, only the faintest rustle of fabric as he reached into a worn leather satchel. He produced a small, unassuming vial filled with a colorless, odorless liquid. "This," his voice was a dry rasp like dead leaves skittering across pavement, "is potent, gradual. It will weaken, confuse, and in sufficient quantity over time. Erase. He named a price that would have made most balk, but Saraphina merely nodded, her eyes fixed on the vial. The exchange was swift, the money disappearing into his satchel as quickly as the vial appeared in her gloved hand. No names exchanged beyond the initial contact. No pleasantries. Pure cold transaction. Clutching the vial, Saraphina felt a tremor of something akin to fear, quickly suppressed. This was a line, she knew, a dark, irrevocable line. But the scorching heat of her ambition, her insatiable hunger for what she felt was owed to her, cauterized any nascent guilt. Julian belonged with her. This was merely expediting the inevitable, correcting a cosmic error, or so she told herself. Her research into Clara's habits intensified, moving beyond simple observation into a focused study. She already knew about the afternoon Earl Grey, but what about vitamins? Herbal supplements for the pregnancy? Any particular nighttime infusions Dr. Eleanor Ainsworth, Clara's physician, might have recommended? Every detail was a potential delivery system, every routine a vulnerability to be exploited. Saraphina's mind, a razor-sharp instrument of manipulation, worked tirelessly, piecing together the mosaic of Clara's daily existence, identifying the precise moment, the perfect method to introduce her silent, insidious agent of change. Later that night, alone in her opulent, sterile apartment that felt more like a gilded cage than a home, Saraphina held the small glass vial up to the light. The liquid within was innocuous, like water. Yet, it held the power to unravel a life, to rewrite a destiny. A faint, cruel smile, a chilling antithesis to Clara's innocent radiance, touched Saraphina's lips. "Time to make some changes around here," she whispered to the silent room, the vial cold against her palm. The first tentative steps into the Garden of Eden had been taken. Now, the serpent was ready to offer its poisoned apple. The vial, cold and smooth against Saraphina Dubois's palm, was not just a container of liquid. It was the key to unlocking the future she so fiercely believed was her due. The first dose, she decided, needed to be a whisper of malice, undetectable, a subtle corruption of Clara Thorne's vitality. To execute this delicate stage, Saraphina required an unwitting accomplice, an unseen hand within the formidable walls of Shadowwood Manor. Her gaze fell upon Annalise Finch, Clara's personal assistant. Annalise was a young woman with a quiet demeanor, a dreamer with a portfolio of surprisingly evocative watercolor sketches she kept hidden in her modest staff quarters. She was also, Saraphina had astutely observed, lonely, somewhat underpaid for her meticulous efforts, and undeniably fascinated by the glittering, almost mythical lifestyle that unfolded daily before her eyes. Annalise was, in short, ripe for manipulation. Saraphina orchestrated a chance encounter at a small, exclusive art gallery in the city, a place Annalise frequented on her rare afternoons off. Feigning an interest in a rather obscure landscape artist whose work Annalise openly admired, Saraphina struck up a conversation. She was charming, attentive, praising Annalise's keen eye and subtly hinting at her own entirely fabricated connections within the art world. "You have such a unique perspective, Annalise," Saraphina had purred, her eyes warm with feigned admiration. "It's a shame more people don't get to see your talent." Was it a simple compliment, or the first thread in a carefully woven net? A lonely heart, after all, is an open door. Annalise, starved for genuine recognition, blossomed under the attention. Saraphina cultivated the budding friendship with practiced ease, meeting Annalise for coffee, offering empty promises of introductions, and all the while, like a skilled interrogator, gently extracting a trove of invaluable information. Clara's preferred calming infusion of linden flower and lemon balm prepared each afternoon. The precise timing of her prenatal appointments with Dr. Eleanor Ainsworth. The quiet hours when Clara would be resting alone. Annalise, believing she had found a glamorous confidant and mentor in the enigmatic Miss Dubois, divulged these details with innocent candor. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how easily trust can be weaponized. The clandestine visit was disturbingly easy to arrange. On a crisp autumn afternoon, with Annalise ensuring the household staff were occupied elsewhere, Saraphina, disguised in a plain trench coat and a silk scarf artfully obscuring her face, slipped through a secondary kitchen entrance of Shadowwood Manor. Annalise, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and a faint, unidentifiable unease, led her quickly towards the still room, a cool, fragrant space where the household's teas, herbs, and cordials were stored in neatly labeled canisters. Mrs. Thorne's linden flower and lemon balm blend is in the celadone tin, third from the left, Annalise whispered, her eyes wide as she took in Saraphina's unusual attire. Are you sure Mr. Thorne won't mind the surprise? She still clung to the belief that Saraphina was perhaps planning some elaborate romantic gesture for Julian. Oh, the irony. Saraphina offered a reassuring, if slightly strange, smile. Julian loves surprises, my dear. And this one is very special. Her gloved hand closed around the cool ceramic of the indicated canister. Once Annalise had been dispatched on a trivial errand to ensure everything is perfect, Saraphina had said she worked quickly. From a tiny, almost invisible compartment in her designer handbag, she retrieved the vial from Silas. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With a steady hand, she unscrewed the cap and carefully measured a small, almost homeopathic amount of the botanical tincture onto a tiny antique silver spoon. The potent liquid was then gently, thoroughly mixed into the fragrant dried leaves, leaving no visible trace. She replaced the canister, her breath catching in her throat. The act was done. The first die cast. She was crossing a moral event horizon, a point of no return. But the image of Clara's serene smile, of Julian's hand resting protectively on Clara's burgeoning belly, solidified her resolve. This was a necessary cruelty, or so the predator told herself. The following afternoon, Clara, feeling a little more fatigued than usual, requested her customary infusion. Annalise, dear, would you mind preparing my linden flower tea? I think I need a moment of calm. Annalise, with a polite smile and a flutter of nerves she couldn't quite place, obliged, entirely unaware of the invisible corruption that now tainted the fragrant blend. Moments later, Clara took her first sip. She paused, a slight frown creasing her brow. This tastes a little different today, Annalise. Perhaps a new batch. I believe so, Mrs. Thorne, Annalise replied, her voice a little too bright. Clara, ever trusting, dismissed it as a minor variation. She drank the cup, eager to soothe the jangled nerves that seemed to accompany her these days. Across town, Saraphina waited a coiled spring of anxious anticipation, but no frantic call came. Clara experienced a mild, throbbing headache later that evening and retired to bed early, attributing it, as she often did, to the general malaise of pregnancy. Unbeknownst to anyone within the oblivious sanctuary of Shadowwood Manor, a slow, insidious poison was beginning its silent, methodical work. Weeks bled into one another. The vibrant hues of autumn gave way to the starker beauty of early winter, and with the changing seasons, Clara's health began a more noticeable, more worrying decline. Her morning sickness returned with a vengeance. Dizzy spells became more frequent. Dark circles like bruises appeared beneath her usually luminous eyes. Dr. Eleanor Ainsworth, a seasoned obstetrician with a reputation for calm competence, grew increasingly concerned. Additional tests were run blood panels, ultrasounds, nutritional assessments, but they yielded nothing conclusive. Everything appears normal on paper, Clara, Dr. Ainsworth said, her brow furrowed in thought. But your symptoms are persistent. For now, strict bed rest is advisable, and we need to keep a very vigilant watch. Julian, finally jolted from his self-absorbed world by the undeniable reality of Clara's suffering, became a man consumed by alarm. His passion for Saraphina was temporarily doused by a cold wave of fear and, beneath it, a gnawing guilt. He abruptly canceled a series of international business trips, choosing to remain close to home, his presence a constant, worried shadow at Clara's bedside. This, however, was not the outcome Saraphina had envisioned. Instead of driving Julian away from his ailing wife and into her waiting arms, her meddling seemed to be having the opposite effect. Clara's deteriorating health had awakened Julian's dormant protective instincts, forging a bond of shared anxiety that Saraphina found utterly infuriating. Damn it, she seethed. He was supposed to be repulsed by the sickness, not drawn closer by it. She realized with a surge of frustrated anger that she needed to accelerate her timeline, to administer something more decisive. But fate, it seemed, had a penchant for irony. Just as Saraphina was recalibrating her strategy, Clara's father, Arthur Pendleton, arrived in Silverwood Hills. A retired diplomat with a keenly perceptive mind, Arthur had never been entirely enamored with the ostentatious display of wealth that characterized the Thorne dynasty. Alerted by Dr. Ainsworth's discreetly worded concerns, he decided to stay for an extended period in one of Shadowwood Manor's guest suites. Arthur was not a man easily fooled. He saw the subtle signs of a fracturing marriage. Julian's forced joviality, a missed dinner excused by a late meeting that never materialized on his schedule, a wandering, haunted glance. Arthur's quiet, observant presence made it infinitely more difficult for Saraphina to orchestrate further clandestine visits or to rely on the increasingly nervous Analyze. And then, amidst all this turmoil, came the news of Clara's upcoming birthday. Julian, perhaps in a genuine attempt to lift Clara's spirits or to assuage his own festering guilt, announced his intention to host a grand celebration. Clara, though still profoundly weak, found a flicker of her old enthusiasm. She clung to the fragile hope that a shared, joyful moment could somehow bridge the widening chasm between them. Saraphina, learning of the impending party from a reluctant, terrified Analyze, saw it not just as a threat, but as a golden, unmissable opportunity. If Clara appeared radiant and happy, the society pages would spin it as a triumphant display of the Thorns' enduring love. Saraphina would not allow that. Her mind, cold and clear, seized upon the thought, Clara's birthday. It was perfect, the perfect stage for a tragedy, the perfect moment to unleash a stronger, more definitive dose of Silas's potent tincture, ensuring Clara's dramatic collapse would not only overshadow any celebratory mood, but perhaps, just perhaps, endanger the pregnancy enough to create lasting, irreparable complications or, better yet, the ultimate solution. This party, she thought with a chilling sense of anticipation, wouldn't just be a celebration. It would be an event that would echo through the annals of Silverwood Hill society for years to come. The stage was now perfectly set for a birthday celebration that would descend into infamy, a horrifying turning point where loyalty, jealousy, and insatiable greed would collide with devastating force under the glittering, uncaring chandeliers of Shadowwood Manor. And Saraphina Dubois would be there, watching it all unfold, a faint, cruel smile playing on her lips. The air within Shadowwood Manor fairly crackled, thick with anticipation. It was the evening of Clara Thorne's 28th birthday, and the ancestral home gleamed like a polished, multifaceted jewel. Enormous, fragrant arrangements of ivory roses and stargazer lilies lined the baronial foyer. In the formal drawing room, a renowned string quartet, specially flown in from Vienna, rehearsed a haunting melody. The chandeliers, ancient Habsburg crystals, sparkled with an almost sentient brilliance. But a far more sinister, more predatory gleam was in Saraphina Dubois's amethyst eyes as she prepared to bestow her final, deadly gift upon the unsuspecting birthday girl. This wasn't just a party, it was a battlefield. Clara, though visibly weakened, was determined to embrace the evening. A soft, ethereal glow emanated from her. She wore a flowing gown of emerald green silk that showcased the gentle curve of her baby bump, a splash of vibrant life against the pallor that still clung to her cheeks. Hope, fragile yet tenacious, fluttered in her heart. Julian himself was the very picture of the adoring, attentive husband, his every action polished to a high sheen. He had personally overseen every minute detail, from the meticulously crafted menu to the Viennese ensemble he knew she adored. But beneath the bespoke tailoring of his tuxedo, guilt, a cold and heavy serpent, coiled in his stomach. Today, he told himself, his mantra a desperate prayer, today was all about Clara. Unbeknownst to either of them, Saraphina had already laid her trap. She arrived fashionably late on the arm of Damien Vance, her gown now one of deepest sapphire, a color that seemed to absorb the light around her. Under the well-rehearsed pretense of assisting Damien with a misplaced gift and taking advantage of Annalise Finch's harried state, Saraphina found her window of opportunity. The kitchen and service areas were controlled chaos. Seizing a moment when the head butler was distracted, Saraphina slipped, a phantom in sapphire, into the quiet, cool sanctity of the stillroom. Her eyes immediately located the ornate, silver-chased tea caddy containing Clara's cherished birthday infusion of fragrant, delicate mixture of white peony tea and silver linden flowers, a blend Julian had once sourced for her during happier times. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With trembling fingers, she retrieved the small, innocuous vial from her evening clutch. This was it, the culmination of weeks of planning, of simmering hatred and desperate ambition. She emptied a significant portion of the clear, odorless liquid, Silas's most potent concoction, directly into the fragrant tea leaves. The instructions from her shadowy purveyor had been terrifyingly explicit. A dose of this magnitude could induce catastrophic illness, potentially trigger a miscarriage, or worse. She quickly resealed the caddy, placed it precisely back on its shelf, and made a discreet, unhurried exit, her composure a chilling mask over the inferno raging within. A poison gift wrapped in love and tradition. The festivities commenced. The grand ballroom was alive with the lively chatter of Silverwood Hills elite. Arthur Pendleton maintained a watchful, solicitous eye on his daughter, his earlier concerns now a constant low thrum of anxiety. Clara, for her part, was valiantly trying to immerse herself in the joy of the occasion. At one point, a dizzying wave of faintness washed over her, the glittering ballroom suddenly tilting. Her hand flew to her temple. "Oh my," she murmured. Arthur was at her side in an instant. "Clara, my dear, are you all right? You look terribly pale. Just a little lightheaded." "Papa," she managed, attempting a reassuring smile. Worried, Arthur gently but firmly suggested she rest for a few moments in one of the upstairs suites. Clara, not wanting to spoil the celebration, reluctantly agreed. Julian, engrossed in a conversation with a senator, rushed to her side as soon as Annalise relayed the news. He found Clara resting on a plush chaise lounge in their private sitting room. "Clara, what is it? Are you in pain?" he asked, his voice tight with a panicky urgency that surprised even himself. Clara offered a weak smile. "Just a temporary spell of weakness, Julian. The baby and I are just a little overwhelmed." But Julian, his guilt now morphing into a raw, primal fear, insisted that Dr. Eleanor Ainsworth, who was among the guests, take a look at her. Dr. Ainsworth examined Clara briefly. "Her vitals are stable for the moment, Julian," she concluded, her tone calm, but with an underlying note of professional concern. "But she does seem exceptionally fatigued. Plenty of hydration and a quiet, early night would be best." Feeling somewhat reassured, yet still longing to cling to the joy of her birthday, Clara agreed to return downstairs for the traditional cutting of the cake. As she and Julian descended the grand staircase, the assembled guests burst into a warm round of applause. She smiled, genuinely touched. At the cake table, Julian placed a gentle, proprietary hand on the small of her back a picture of domestic bliss. Saraphina, a silent, watchful predator at the fringes of the crowd, observed every detail with unnerving intensity. Her gaze noted the precise moment a young maid named Elsie leaned in to whisper in Clara's ear, presumably about preparing her special birthday tea to accompany the cake. Elsie then disappeared towards the kitchen to brew a pot from the very caddy Saraphina had so recently, so lethally corrupted. After the chorus of "Happy Birthday" had faded, Elsie reappeared bearing a delicate silver tray. Upon it rested a single, exquisite antique porcelain teacup, its contents steaming gently. Clara, hoping the familiar infusion would soothe her uneasy stomach, accepted the cup gratefully. She smiled at Julian, a tired but tender smile, then raised the cup to her lips, utterly, tragically unaware that it carried a lethal dose of Saraphina du Bois's meticulously administered poison. It didn't take long. The effect was terrifyingly swift. Within minutes of taking the first few sips, the little color Clara possessed drained from her face, leaving it a ghastly, ashen gray. Her eyes widened in sudden, uncomprehending terror. A low moan escaped her lips as a searing, wrenching pain seized her abdomen, doubling her over. "Clara, what's wrong?" Julian caught her just as she collapsed, her body going limp in his arms, the delicate porcelain teacup shattering on the cold, unforgiving marble floor. The poison tea spread like a malevolent stain, a stain that could never be truly washed away. Gasps and shrieks of horror erupted among the stunned guests. Dr. Ainsworth elbowed her way through the horrified crowd, her voice sharp and commanding. "Give her space. Someone call for an ambulance now." She knelt beside Clara, her fingers immediately going to Clara's wrist, then to her neck. The situation was critical. Clara's heart rate was terrifyingly erratic, her breathing shallow and labored. This was no mere fainting spell. Arthur Pendleton, his face a mask of grim disbelief, rushed to his daughter's side, his composure finally cracking. In the ensuing chaos, Saraphina managed to feign a convincing display of shock and concern, allowing a frantic, oblivious Damien Vance to comfort her. Inwardly, however, a maelstrom of emotions raged, a chilling terror of exposure, a perverse satisfaction at the efficacy of her actions, and a fleeting, quickly suppressed flicker of doubt. Has she gone too far? Julian, on his knees on the cold marble, cradled Clara's lolling head in his lap, his carefully constructed facade utterly demolished. Tears, hot and unashamed, streamed down his face. Regret, a monstrous, consuming entity, tore at him. He realized only now, in this moment of horrifying clarity, how deeply, how irrevocably he loved his wife. As the wail of approaching sirens grew louder, he felt a helplessness so profound it threatened to suffocate him. Over and over, like a desperate litany, Julian whispered, his voice choked with sobs, "Hold on, Clara. Please, God, hold on. Don't leave me." His words were a prayer lost in the unfolding nightmare. On the very night Clara Thorne was meant to celebrate another year of life, she lay unconscious in the back of an ambulance, her fate hanging by the slenderest of threads. Shadowwood Manor, mere moments before aglow with laughter and music, was plunged into a stunned, hushed darkness, overshadowed by a tragedy that was no accident, but a meticulously, malevolently crafted catastrophe. The sterile, brightly lit waiting area of Silverwood Crest Medical Center throbbed with a palpable tension. Julian and Arthur paced the length of the corridor like caged animals. Finally, Dr. Ainsworth emerged, her face etched with exhaustion. "She's stable for now," she announced, her voice low, "but it's critical. Her symptoms, they strongly suggest some form of acute toxic exposure. We're running comprehensive toxicology screenings, and we need to monitor the baby with extreme vigilance." Toxic exposure. The words hit Julian like a physical blow. Clara's special birthday tea. Hadn't she said it tasted odd? His heart hammered. Could someone get Saraphina? No, it was too monstrous. Or was it? As grim-faced police officers began arriving at Shadowwood Manor, Detective Miles Corbin listened to initial reports. His gaze, quiet and observant, caught a flagged note on the guest list. Saraphina du Bois, person of interest. A prior complex fraud investigation. No charges filed. Circumstantial, but the breadcrumb was there. Interesting, Corbin murmured to himself. Very interesting indeed. The first threads of a dark, tangled web were beginning to emerge. The sterile hum of the medical center became the soundtrack to days blurred by fear. Detective Miles Corbin, a man whose quiet intensity often unnerved those accustomed to more bombastic displays of authority, had a particular talent for sifting through the debris of shattered lives to find the sharp edges of truth. He suspected that truth lay hidden beneath layers of expensive perfume and sophisticated lies, leading him ever closer to Saraphina Du Bois's doorstep. That old fraud investigation whispered of a pattern, didn't it? A woman who knew how to get what she wanted, consequences be damned. Clara Thorne, meanwhile, drifted in a precarious twilight between life and death. For several agonizing days, she remained in a medically induced semi-consciousness, her body a fragile battleground. The comprehensive toxicology reports finally landed like a bombshell. Clara had indeed been poisoned deliberately. The substance was a rare, complex botanical compound designed for slow devastation, yet administered in a quantity that suggested a terrifying final intent. It was the kind of poison that screamed premeditation cold, calculated, and utterly ruthless. Shadowwood Manor, no longer a symbol of idyllic prosperity, transformed overnight into a sprawling, opulent crime scene. Yellow police tape, stark and incongruous against the ancient ivy-clad stone, cordoned off entire sections of the estate. It was Annalise Finch, Clara's timid personal assistant, who finally provided the crucial break in the case. The young woman was a wreck, tormented by a gnawing, corrosive guilt. She knew, with a certainty that felt like a physical illness, that her naivety had made her an unwitting pawn. One dreary afternoon, her face tear-streaked and ashen, she sought out Arthur Pendleton in the somber library. The words, when they finally came, tumbled out in a torrent of choked sobs. She recounted Saraphina's calculated cultivation of their friendship, her own misguided belief that Saraphina was merely a close friend of Julian's. And then, the most damning detail of all, Annalise admitted, her voice barely a whisper, to once seeing Saraphina near the still room, her movements furtive, fiddling with a small, dark glass vial just moments before Clara's special birthday tea was due to be prepared. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. Now, the memory was a shard of ice piercing her heart. Arthur listened, his patrician features hardening into a mask of cold, controlled fury. "Analyze," he said, his voice low but firm. "You must tell this to Detective Corbin. Every single detail. It is imperative for Clara's sake." Annalise Finch's subsequent formal statement was the linchpin Detective Corbin had been waiting for. Her tearful, detailed account provided the investigation with both a credible motive and a clear opportunity. Coupled with the whispers of Saraphina's questionable financial past and her strategically positioned presence at the ill-fated party, Corbin now had more than enough to proceed. He immediately sought and was granted a search warrant for Saraphina Du Bois's opulent penthouse apartment. When Detective Corbin and his team arrived at Saraphina's door, she greeted them with an air of cool, almost disdainful amusement. "A search warrant, Detective Corbin? How delightfully dramatic. Do come in. Please try not to scuff the Italian marble, will you? It's frightfully expensive." Her audacity was breathtaking, but Corbin, a keen observer of human nature, detected the faintest tremor in her voice, a telltale flicker of panic in her amethyst eyes. The search was professional and thorough. For a moment, a flicker of triumph crossed Saraphina's features. Had she outsmarted them? "Quite the elaborate treasure hunt, Detective," she purred. "Finding anything incriminating amongst my lingerie and lipstick?" Corbin ignored her taunt, his attention focused on a small antique rosewood writing desk tucked away in an alcove. One of the drawers, he noted, was locked. "Ms. Du Bois," he said, his voice polite but firm, "would you be so kind as to provide the key?" A shadow crossed her face. "The key? Oh, that silly old thing. I seem to have misplaced it." "Indeed," Corbin replied, his gaze unwavering. "In that case, Ms. Du Bois, with your permission or without it, we'll have to open it." He motioned to one of his officers, who, with grim professionalism, produced a slender set of lock-picking tools. The sharp, distinct click of the old tumblers yielding was an unbearably loud sound in the oppressive silence. It sounded, Saraphina thought with a sudden, sickening lurch of her stomach, like the snapping shut of a trap. Inside the drawer, nestled amongst expensive stationery, lay a small, velvet-lined jewelry box. And within that box, half hidden beneath a tangle of glittering baubles, was a small, dark glass vial identical to the one Analyze Finch had so damningly described. It was half-used. The game, it seemed, was up. The forensic lab confirmed it within hours. The liquid remaining in the vial was a perfect, irrefutable match for the rare compound found in Clara Thorne's ravaged bloodstream and in the dregs of the shattered teacup. The net had closed. Saraphina Dubois was arrested later that evening. The charges stark and brutal. Attempted murder of Clara Thorne and attempted murder of an unborn child. As the officers read her rights, her carefully constructed composure finally, spectacularly, shattered. "This is an absolute outrage," she shrieked, her voice raw and shaking as the cold steel of the handcuffs closed around her slender wrists. "You have absolutely no idea who you're dealing with. I'm being framed. Do you hear me? This is a travesty." Her protests were futile. The news of her arrest exploded across the city, igniting a media firestorm. The Thorne name, once a revered bastion of untouchable wealth, was now irrevocably, devastatingly tainted. Meanwhile, in the hushed quiet of her private hospital room, Clara Thorne was slowly, painstakingly beginning her long journey back from the brink. Fleeting moments of lucidity stretched into longer, more coherent stretches of awareness. One cool, rain-swept afternoon, as Julian sat by her bedside, his face etched with sleeplessness and despair, Clara's eyelids fluttered open. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "Clara," he whispered, his voice cracking. Her voice, when it finally came, was a mere breath, fragile as spun moonlight. "Julian, what? What happened to me?" And so, in the stark glare of the sterile room, with the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor a somber counterpoint to his agonized words, Julian Thorne confessed. Everything. The sordid affair, the insidious web of lies, the catastrophic betrayal that had almost cost Clara her life and the precious, innocent life of their child. He spared her nothing, spared himself nothing, the words tumbling out of him in a torrent of raw, unfiltered self-loathing. Clara listened, her wide, luminous eyes slowly filling with tears. Tears not just of lingering physical pain, but a betrayal so profound it threatened to shatter what little remained of her fractured world. When he finally fell silent, his proud head bowed, his shoulders shaking, she whispered, her voice trembling with a dawning, unbearable horror. "Saraphina, the woman Damien Vance brought to my birthday party. Someone you were with, tried to kill me and our baby." The disbelief was a fresh wave of agony. Julian could only nod, his own tears finally breaking free. "Clara, I am so sorry," he choked out, his voice thick with a despair that offered no redemption. This is all my fault. My unforgivable, my wretched, damnable fault." As Clara lay absorbing the horrifying truth, Saraphina Dubois, from the cold confines of a police-holding cell, was already plotting her defense. Incensed, defiant, and utterly unrepentant, she secured the services of the most notoriously ruthless defense attorney in the city. Her narrative was already taking shape. She was the true victim, framed by a jealous former assistant, perhaps even by Julian Thorne himself, a convenient scapegoat to cover his own dark sins. The intricate web of lies was far from unraveled. It was merely being respun, its threads stronger, more venomous, ready for its dramatic debut in a packed, expectant courtroom. The real battle, it seemed, had only just begun. The air outside the venerable stone edifice of the Central Criminal Court was a maelstrom of flashbulbs, shouting reporters, and morbidly curious onlookers. This was it, the trial of Saraphina Dubois, a spectacle that had gripped the city. Clara Thorne, still achingly frail but with a newfound steely resolve in her pale blue eyes, arrived in a discreet black town car. She was in a wheelchair, gently pushed by Julian. Dr. Eleanor Ainsworth walked beside them, a supportive presence. Julian, his face a mask of grim determination, shielded Clara from the intrusive camera lenses, his jaw tight. His public reckoning was about to begin. Inside the hallowed, oak-paneled courtroom, an almost suffocating silence reigned. Judge Alistair Blackwood, a man whose reputation for stern, no-nonsense jurisprudence preceded him, presided from his elevated bench. Saraphina Du Bois sat at the defense table, the picture of demure, almost pitiable modesty. She wore a simple, high-necked dress of a muted dove gray, her expression one of carefully cultivated vulnerability. The prosecution, led by the coolly efficient district attorney, Evelyn Hayes, opened with a compelling, damning narrative, painting a vivid picture of Saraphina's consuming jealousy, her ruthless ambition, and a motive as old as time itself: envy. The first key witness was Annalise Finch. Tears streamed down her cheeks as D.A. Hayes gently guided her through her testimony, her voice trembling as she recounted Saraphina's insidious manipulation. On cross-examination, Saraphina's attorney was relentless, but Annalise, though distressed, held firm. "I had no vendetta," she reiterated, her voice gaining a surprising strength. Only guilt for my unintentional involvement." I believed her. I truly believed she was a friend. Next came the forensic experts, their testimony a dry, methodical, yet utterly devastating account of the scientific evidence, establishing beyond any reasonable doubt that the rare poison found in Saraphina's apartment was an exact match to the toxins in Clara's system in a shattered teacup. Science, cold and hard, was pointing a finger directly at Saraphina. Then, a tense hush fell over the courtroom as Julian Thorne was called to the stand. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. His voice heavy with a palpable, soul-deep remorse. He recounted with unflinching honesty how his casual flirtation had spiraled into an all-consuming affair, and the profound guilt he felt for betraying the woman he now realized he loved more than life itself. When Saraphina's lawyer rose to cross-examine him, the courtroom crackled. The strategy was clear: to insinuate that Julian had framed an inconvenient mistress. "Mr. Thorne," the attorney began, his voice smooth as silk, "tell the court, do you still have feelings for my client, Miss Saraphina Du Bois?" The courtroom held its breath. Julian didn't hesitate. He turned, his gaze finding Clara in her wheelchair. Her eyes, though shadowed with pain, held a quiet strength that seemed to anchor him. He inhaled sharply, then turned back to face his questioner, his voice clear and unwavering. "I was infatuated, misguided, perhaps even temporarily lost. But that is over. Completely and utterly over. My only concern now, my only feelings, are for my wife Clara, for our child, and for ensuring that justice is served here today." For the first time during the entire trial, Saraphina Du Bois lost her composure. It was as if Julian's public, unequivocal rejection had finally pierced her armor. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor, her face contorted with rage and thwarted desire. "You liar," she shrieked, her voice raw and ragged. "You promised me everything. You said you loved me. You said Clara was nothing to you, just an obligation." Judge Blackwood's gavel slammed down. "Order. Order in this court. Ms. Du Bois, control yourself, or I will have you removed." The bailiff moved towards Saraphina, who collapsed back in her seat, dissolving into a torrent of convulsive sobs. The jury watched, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The carefully constructed victim narrative was crumbling before their very eyes. It took the jury less than 2 days to reach a verdict. As the forepersons stood to read it, the tension thickened. On the charge of attempted murder of Clara Thorne, we the jury find the defendant, Saraphina Du Bois. A pause that stretched for an eternity. "Guilty." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The foreperson continued, her voice clear and steady. on the charge of attempted murder of an unborn child. Guilty, on the charge of reckless endangerment. Guilty. The words fell like hammer blows. Saraphina's face went ashen. Judge Blackwood, his expression grim, proceeded to sentencing, citing the calculated, premeditated nature of the crime and the extreme vulnerability of the pregnant victim. He sentenced Saraphina Dubois to a lengthy prison term, 15 years. In that moment, as the sentence was read, all eyes turned to Julian. He rose slowly and walked with a heavy, measured tread to where Saraphina sat, now slumped and defeated. He stopped before her. He looked her directly in the eyes, a fleeting, unreadable moment, perhaps a farewell, perhaps a final, damning judgment. Then, without a word, he turned away. Tears, undeniable and glistening, traced paths down his cheeks as he walked back to Clara's side, gently, tenderly placing a trembling hand on her shoulder. His silent devastation spoke volumes, a profound public acknowledgement of the irreparable harm caused not just by Saraphina's actions, but by his own. Saraphina Dubois was led away in handcuffs, her high society dreams reduced to the grim reality of a prison cell. Clara watched her go, her own tears now trickling silently down her pale, cheeks, tears of relief. Yes, but also of a deep, ineffable sadness for the innocents lost. In that instant, she saw Julian not as the arrogant magnate, but simply as a flawed, deeply wounded man, forever scarred. The legal battle had reached its dramatic conclusion, but what of the emotional war still raging within their hearts? The path to healing, if one even existed, stretched before them, long, arduous, and shrouded in uncertainty. The heavy iron gates of Blackwood Correctional Facility clanged shut, the sound echoing with a grim finality that sealed Saraphina's venomous dreams within its cold stone walls. But for Clara and Julian Thorne, the echoes of betrayal would reverberate for years to come. In the weeks and months that followed, a profound quiet descended upon Shadowwood Manor. The once bustling halls now felt hollow. Clara's physical recovery was a slow, arduous process under the constant supervision of Dr. Ainsworth. Miraculously, thanks to swift medical intervention and Clara's own steely resilience, their baby had survived the ordeal, though the pregnancy remained extremely high risk. Each steady beat of that tiny heart was a victory, a defiant note of hope in a symphony of despair. Julian, a changed man, dedicated himself entirely to Clara's care. He spent countless hours by her side, reading to her, holding her hand in a silence that was more eloquent than words. With a quiet strength that surprised even herself, Clara made it clear that he had to attend therapy, both individual and couples counseling. Julian, without a moment's hesitation, agreed, enrolling in intensive sessions, excavating the dark, uncomfortable truths he had kept buried for so long. One crisp, early winter morning, as a watery sun broke through the clouds, Clara Thorne gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl whom they named Aria Rose Thorne. The moment Aria let out her first lusty cry, both Clara and Julian broke down in tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude. This tiny child, so fiercely wanted, so nearly lost, represented a second chance, a fresh start. When Clara and baby Aria returned to Shadowwood Manor, the grand house felt transformed. The magnificent nursery became the new, vibrant heart of the estate. Laughter, soft and nurturing, returned. One late afternoon, as Julian cradled the sleeping Aria, Clara watched him from the doorway. She saw the unguarded tenderness in his eyes, the awe. The man who had once hidden behind extravagance now seemed humbled, grounded by fatherhood. In that quiet moment, Clara took a tentative step towards forgiveness. "I don't know if our love will ever fully recover, Julian," she whispered later that evening, her voice laced with a fragile hope. "But for Aria's sake, I'm willing to try." They decided they would not let Saraphina's actions define them. The memory of that poisoned tea became a reminder to never again take their bond for granted. Julian began working quietly with philanthropic organizations supporting women and children in crisis. Clara found a new purpose, speaking discreetly at small gatherings about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in vulnerability. Life at Shadowwood Manor continued. The gates remained grand, but beyond them lay a family that had weathered a horrific storm, finding an authentic wealth not in possessions, but in the love that had almost been lost now, rediscovered in the gentle coos of their newborn. The illusions had indeed shattered, but hope, fragile yet tenacious, had against all odds begun to bloom in the very cracks of a broken life. So, the story has come to a close. And now, to our amazing friends. You're still here, aren't you? If you've stayed with us until this very moment, then something in this story must have touched your heart, stirred a memory, or maybe even mirrored a chapter of your own life. And that means we're already connected in a quiet but powerful way. Let's take a moment not to judge what's right or wrong, but to see through a different lens, one that simply asks, what can we learn from this? This story isn't just about betrayal, manipulation, or the courtroom twists. It's about clarity, about the quiet power of self-worth, and the strength to walk away from what no longer respects your light. Clara's journey reminds us that healing often begins the moment we stop begging for validation and start choosing ourselves. The Stoics taught us that we cannot control what others do, only how we respond. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. That's the lesson here. Clara didn't just survive, she transformed. And you can too. Life may throw its darkness at you, but you still get to choose your next move. So, if this story moves something in you, even just a little, like it, share it with someone who might need a moment of clarity today, and subscribe to our channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we walk through them with you, together, one truth at a time. And if no one's told you lately, you deserve a love that doesn't ask you to prove your worth. Let this be your reminder. We'll see you in the next one.